What happened?
Oh, lost you for a minute there. Okay, now we're back. We lost signal there for a moment. It might be because my guest was struck by lightning in a car and may have shorted out my equipment. But we're back, and so just a little kind of recap. CP is owner of Champion Performance here in Austin, Texas. She is the creator of the MOBO system and also a renowned physical therapist who's treated many professional soccer players, especially the women's players who living down in Austin, and also for fun decided to do her PhD. So why did you decide to do a PhD on top of all this craziness?
Well, I'm kind of a research buff. I spend a lot of time coming up with experimental designs in my head about questions I have, and just this overwhelming curiosity related to the world of physical therapy, related to the world of strength training, mobility, and I thought, what better way to use my energy and go ahead and get another degree. I love working at the University of Texas in Austin. It's a great platform for me to be able to do some research on my soccer players and use my physical therapy practice as a way to collect data and work with some very high-level competitive athletes.
So you developed a return to play screen, right? It's called the ELISA test, and tell us a little bit about the ELISA and why you. With all the other tests of performance or function out there, why you decided to put this together?
Yeah, I would say my PT practice about 6 or 7 years ago, because I was one of the few practices that was really working with high-level athletes, all the tests that were out there seemed to be a little bit too easy for my athletes to perform, and I thought, man, there's no way that I can really get a good gauge of like what's truly happening intrinsically, if their brain is, their neurological system is speaking to the muscular system the way I want it to, if timing is an issue, if reaction is an issue. So I kind of started doing a lot of research on, what these tests were looking at, the deficits they were exposing for my athletes, and then trying to come up with some of my own that I felt were more challenging and specific to what I was looking for. So I came up with ELISA, which stands for the Advanced Lower Extremity Sport Assessment. And so it's mostly looking at people with hip, knee, ankle, foot injuries, which is the most prevalent injury area in soccer specifically, but, for a lot of athletes. And started really trying to put together a comprehensive, test battery where there were not just 2 or 3 things I'm looking at, but maybe 8 to 10 things. And that way I can get a better, broader picture of really what these deficits are for my athletes trying to return to sport.
And this is what you're doing your PhD on, right? Like you're actually trying to quantify this and validate your test, correct?
Yes.
Yes it is. Validation nerds.
Yes, we are.
We're both very nerdy, but it's good because I really appreciate about you that you we want to elevate the game in training, right? And training and physical therapy, that we're not just making these broad statements anymore. But I think the other aspect of that is I sort of have started saying that I think wellness is the base of performance, and that's sort of a game change from I think where we started. And I think that performance is more than just your numbers. And, it's more than just the number that you put on the bar, right? It's the quality, it's the way it looks, it's so much more performance, and wellness really tracks back to, how your arch, is supported, or, where your feet are positioned. And, if you get those things in check, not only do you feel more well, but obviously you perform better. But to have tests that can kind of help us, give an actual quantifiable yes or no, you were ready to play, you're ready to return, you're ready to train, I think is really important, because it's really hard to still convince coaches who are sometimes very old school that, yeah, this person's got an arch problem and they're not quite ready, and they're like, well, they can stand, so they should go. So I actually think it's really cool that you're kind of creating this hurdle that they have to go over to actually allow their kids to play, sort of like concussions. So.
Yeah, one of the biggest issues we've had is dealing with coaches who, or even let's just say in the medical community, like a surgeon, a lot of times they're just using time as the, the metric, the way to measure that. Oh, you're 6 months out of an ACL, you should be good to go. But then when you actually put these athletes into practice or into some sport skill, watch them cut, watch them jump, qualitatively, you're right. You can see that the quality of movement is just not there. They're delayed, or they just don't have the strength to help manage, whether it's arch or hip or knee, that kind of control. And so by really creating something, a test where they have to basically pass it at a certain parameter, or that means they're at risk for injury, a lot of these coaches and surgeons get to decide, well, maybe if my athlete isn't ready, maybe we need more rehab time. Maybe we need to specifically target some area or deficit in that. And that's why with the Alyssa, we added the qualitative piece to it, because a lot of my athletes are so competitive. They can literally kind of squeak out a passing score from a measurement standpoint. Maybe both of their legs, measure the same distance, but one of them looks markedly different in their quality of landing or some mechanic of knee control or hip control.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think one of the things with returning sort of, this time perspective is that, I mean, everybody's an individual anyway, and learning, everybody learns at a different speed, so it only makes sense that everybody recovers at a different pace and also relearns tasks at a different pace. And oftentimes we just sort of let these kids or these athletes, old or young, just be they stay out of the activity or their sport for a certain amount of time, and then they go back in, but they're going from. Well, first of all, if they got injured, they probably lacked some range of motion or some neurologic ability to turn on a muscle, right? They were missing that wiring or that strength. So something was a deficit to begin with. Minor, subtracting the few high contact injuries that we see, maybe like 2% of the actual what we see, everything else being mostly non-contact and very preventable. So they were missing something to begin with. Then they sit out for 6 months, and we put them back in a situation where they weren't in a full range of motion. You never really go through a full hip range of motion to a full deep squat if you're playing any sport, right? I mean, you're just not, the movement's so quick that you're not going to explore that full. So having something that prevents people from kind of going back too soon, I think might give us an extra chance to be like, all right, do you have full range of motion, yes or no? And you should have that full range of motion before you go back to quick, short ranges of motion. So I think in that way, let's kind of talk a little bit about like mobility as a whole piece, because I think it's becoming much more popular. It's becoming more, it's more talked about. I mean, hell, there are mobility certifications now for CrossFit, which is great. I think Kelly Starrett's done a great job of just breaking the noise and the conversation. And it's kind of like what Gray Cook did a couple years ago with the FMS. The FMS was the functional movement screen, and although a lot of its stuff's come out recently that just says it's not such a high-value screen as we thought it was, what I say about Gray Cook was he understood movement, and what he was trying to do was start the conversation. Give everybody a platform. And regardless of what the status of that test is in terms of what it can detect, he started the conversation and honestly allowed you to pursue your testing and evolve it. And regardless of what we want to say about some of the things that maybe Kelly says out there, he started the conversation, and I'm really grateful for those too. So do you have any thoughts about like where mobility has come from? Because I know you were doing this before it was talked about, and I was actually doing a lot of mobility stuff before it was even talked about. Yeah. So how have you seen it evolved, and how has it evolved for you?
Well, the interesting thing is about Kelly and Gray is they're both physical therapists. So they have a physical therapy background, which is part of what we learn in our schooling is a lot of biomechanics and joint mechanics, so looking at the kinematics of what happens to each joint. And of course, mobility is the basis for all of that. And so it's kind of interesting to see how, the physical therapy world, when you had to get injured first and then rehab something for somebody to really take a deep look at that. It's nice to see now that is transitioning into the world of other professionals, whether it's kinesiologists, it's personal trainers, it's, the CrossFit community. I really love that it is starting to integrate into everything. And so not just, you having to get hurt first for somebody to really take a look at your mobility and figure out that that's a very important component, if not, the basis of your movement and how people can progressively move forward with that. So I really love that it is all coming full circle so that the general population, can be educated about it, whether we're talking about people using foam rollers and yoga's become super popular now in the grand scheme of people helping to manage flexibility and mobility. And so I just love that it's starting to transition into the world of athletics and exercise.
So, yeah, absolutely. That there's this crossover where it's now a part of the picture, right? It wasn't even talked about. But you said there mobility and flexibility. For people who kind of don't understand that they're slightly different, can you kind of talk about what's the difference between mobility and flexibility, and how we look at them in terms of movement and training?
Sure. It's when we look at it from a medical perspective, which is kind of when we have to really break it down because we have to measure things very specifically. When we're talking about flexibility, we're looking at basically a muscle or a muscle group lengthening between point A and point B. So we're looking at its rubber band or elastic effect, its extensibility, and whether that muscle can shorten and lengthen through its what we would call a normative range. And we basically have been doing research for years and years, collecting what does an adult quadricep look like and how do you know if it's flexible. Mobility is different in that we're really talking about what happens at the joint. That's a totally different tissue that we're attacking. We're looking at a joint capsule. We're looking at ligamentous length, whether it's creating stability in the joint, meaning holding the joint together, and then the capsule, which is what holds it all in place, is really where we can start limiting mobility from the beginning, and then you move into the muscles. So mobility is just a term that kind of encompasses all of the movement, but it looks at things from a joint perspective versus flexibility really targeting a muscle from point A to point B, where it inserts on a bone and originates on a bone and then inserts on a bone. And so we're looking at the differences between those two, because you can be flexible, too flexible. In fact, some people are, and then some people aren't flexible enough. So we like people to be in that little gray zone. And then mobility wise, there is a normal range of motion, let's just say, that the shoulder should have, and that would include all of the muscles that surround it. And that's kind of the difference that we're talking about here.
So would you say that mobility is more of a systems perspective, that we're looking at what is the normal range of motion without restriction from any number of muscles, really, or tissues or whatever, just to get into that position. Whereas flexibility, I like to tell my athletes, and this comes from when I worked back with Dr. Conway years ago, that he used to say that muscles, you can't lengthen a muscle. You really can't, this whole thing of stretching, you can't stretch the muscle. You can either contract or relax. And the state of the muscle's length is based on how relaxed it is or how contracted it is. And that sort of brings you into a whole new understanding of the musculature, because that's why, PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which is just the craziest name in the world for contract, relax, stretching, works, is because, you're contracting the muscles, you're putting tension in there, and then you're relaxing, and you're really just sort of modulating the nervous system and tricking it to return to its length, right? To its natural tense length. And I think that there's been a disservice. Disservice, I think, previously, but a beautiful change now to talk about mobility as the system. Can your system get into this position? Because For example, sprinters are known to have very tight hamstrings.